Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. In this video, we are going more in depth about the legislative branch by focusing on how the Senate was designed and how its design affects us. When the framers were designing the Senate, they were having a hard time figuring out the number of senators needed for it. They thought about having proportional representation where the bigger the population, the more votes a state would have. However, large states with the most number of people will have a significant influence over small states. A resolution introduced a proportional system, but delegates from tiny states did not like that. In 1790, about 59,100 people in Delaware, of which approximately 8,900 were enslaved. By comparison, about 434,400 people lived in Pennsylvania, 3,700 or so were enslaved. That was 7 times the size of Delaware. About 747,600 people, including 292,000 enslaved people, lived in Virginia, which was 12 times the size of Delaware. No one at the convention knew if or how enslaved people would be counted. On June 11, 1790, 2 delegates from Connecticut, Roger Sherman and Oliver Ellsworth, proposed a compromise. They said, quote, "How about proportional representation in the lower house and equal representation in the upper?" Unquote. An 11-person subcommittee was tasked with developing a compromise on representation. 2 weeks later, here were the subcommittee's recommendations. The lower branch of the legislature, the House of Representatives, should be selected proportionately according to the size of the state's populations. The upper branch, the Senate, should contain the same number of representatives from each state. Unquote. The framers settled on this. For Article 1, Section 2, it states, quote, "The House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every second year by the people of the several states." For Article 1, Section 3, it states, "The Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, chosen by the legislature thereof for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote." Unquote. So, proportional representation did not apply to both chambers of Congress. It only applied to the House of Representatives according to a state's population, while equal representation was applied to the Senate no matter what a state's population is. To the framers, they thought this design would keep things fair and not have a state's representation overpower another state's representation. But is it fair right now? Well, let's talk about it. In 2018, less than half of the U.S. population, those in small states, was represented by 82 senators. More than half, including big states with larger cities and more diverse populations, were represented by only 18 senators. The situation is likely to worsen. Forecasts indicate that in 2040, 70% of Americans will congregate in the 15 states represented by 30 senators. Unless another state joins the union, the remaining 50% of people will get the other 70 senators. Senators from small states can secure more federal funding per constituent than those from larger states. In 2014, California received $1,547 per resident, while Vermont received $3,091 per resident. Let's look at another example. The 5 farm-based states of the upper Midwest, Iowa, Kansas, Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota, hold 10% of the Senate, but only 4% of the U.S. population. Since the 1930s, rural senators have persuaded Congress to pass a farm bill that encourages farmers to grow certain crops by giving them subsidies, money to buy seeds, for instance. Even worse, farmers who accept subsidies can use only 15% of their acreage to plant fruits and other vegetables. So rarer crops become more expensive. Because of the makeup of the U.S. Senate and the decisions they make, it is part of the reason why healthy food is more expensive than unhealthy food. So, based on this information, the Senate's equal representation design is unfair. Originally, it was supposed to help balance the political voices of small states to be on a similar level with large states. But since the United States expanded itself to the west and the population significantly increased in the past couple of centuries, more states were added. The country's population grew unevenly, with many people living in specific pockets of the country. While that would affect each state's representation in the House, it would not matter for the Senate. For example, imagine having New York State's population being equivalent to the population of several of the smallest states combined, but New York State has less political power in the Senate. It is not just New York State, it is also many other large states with so many people living in them. The point is, the Senate's design has not evolved since the United States expanded its land and the population increased. What was once trying to be fair to the small states ended up giving them disproportionate power in the long term at the expense of large states. It appears the current design of the Senate is unfair to the large states. No matter how the Senate is designed, it cannot be unfair to either the small or large states. With all of this in mind, let's talk about how states handled their senates. Many American states initially modeled themselves after the national government and established bicameral legislatures, in which the upper house was like the Senate, equal representation in a county or district, regardless of population. This practice was challenged in 1964 when the Supreme Court heard the case of Reynolds versus Sims. The district where Sims lived had 14 times as many people as another one. The court agreed with Sims and declared little federalism to be unconstitutional because of the Equal Protection Clause. The court said, quote, "This violates the 14th Amendment, which promises equal protection of the laws. All people should be treated fairly, and legislative districts within every state should be equal in population," unquote. The decision, what the court called one person, one vote, applied to all 50 states. This makes as much sense for the US government as it does for states, but the Great Compromise embedded equal representation into the US Senate, and the Equal Protection Clause referred only to the states. Now, keep in mind that many countries have bicameral legislatures. Some, like Switzerland and Australia, also have uneven representation in one of their chambers, just like the US. However, the population differences between small and large states in the US are greater than anywhere else in the world. On top of that, in many other countries, a chamber that is more representative of the people has more power than the one that is not. Austria, Poland, France, Czech Republic, and Spain. In these countries, for example, the upper house generally cannot kill laws passed by the lower house. This is different from the US, where the House and Senate have equal influence on legislation. This is critical to remember because imagine having more senators from small states than large states slow down or block progress. Again, this goes back to the population issue, where a small number of people overrule the large number of people. Let's look at another example. In Australia, each of the 6 states is represented by 12 senators who are elected by proportional representation. In addition, the Australian National Territory, where the capital Canberra is located, and the Northwest Territory each get 2 senators. This system makes it easy for small parties to win a seat. As a result, there is a greater variety of viewpoints in the upper house than the lower house. Even if equal rather than proportional voting power by the states was a good idea, questions remain. Was it wise for the framers to specify 2 senators per state in the Constitution? Since 1959, when Hawaii became the last state to join the Union, there have been a total of 100 members in the Senate. But the national population has almost doubled since then, and Congress today faces many more issues than we ever did. Would it be a good idea to increase the number of senators in each state? Do we need to change the Senate to be a proportional representation system? Whatever ideas we can think of, it has to be designed in a way that is fair to every state and balances the viewpoints of the state's interests. Otherwise, we will keep having the Senate unfairly give disproportionate political power to a group of small states where its collective power is equivalent to New York State, but New York State only has 2 senators compared to the small states that have several more senators, and their interests overrule large states like New York State. Let's look at a practical example of the Senate's design playing out for a specific legislation, the USA Patriot Act. On September 20th, 2001, President George W. Bush made a post-9/11 address to Congress, which led to the creation of the USA Patriot Act, uniting and strengthening America by providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism. The legislation was passed by Congress on October 26, 2001, which would allocate $13.1 billion for states to prevent local acts of terrorism. The chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Patrick J. Leahy, saw to it that the Patriot Act mandated every state, regardless of size or need, would receive a minimum of 0.75% of the funds. Leahy is a Democratic senator from Vermont, a rather small state. He wanted to make sure his home state would not be shortchanged. States used much of the money they were given to hire more emergency workers and to pay for equipment and training. States also sent the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, lists of sites they considered potential targets for terrorists, like the Hoover Dam. These lists helped DHS determine additional funding to protect those sites. Some of the smallest states, however, submitted the longest list of possible targets, which upped their federal funding. The funding formula meant that the least money per resident went to the 10 large states DHS considered the most likely targets. And the 10 states at the bottom of the risk list, all small, received the highest amount per resident. With the lopsided formula, small states had enough money left over to buy some dubious items. Here are the numbers. The USA Patriot Act formula gave $61 per person to Wyoming, but California only received $14 per person, the lowest among any state. In 2007, then-Senator Barack Obama supported a bill that decreased the minimum grant to every state from 0.75% of Patriot Act funds to 0.25%. This bill died. To steer money to areas most at risk of terrorism and violence when he became president, Obama directed DHS to award funds from various programs to states along America's vulnerable borders and to urban areas. Using a calculation based on the likelihood of threats, the department has done exactly that. Nevertheless, Wyoming still gets more money per person from the Patriot Act than California does. So, even though the rate was supposed to be the same for all states, a loophole in the formula gave small states an unfair advantage in getting more funding per person than the large states. This goes back to how the Senate is designed and it being tailored to appeal to the interests of the small states the most. In conclusion, the Senate's original design, intended to balance the voices of small and large states, has over time created an imbalance that gives smaller states disproportionate power in the modern United States. While the framers' goal was fairness and unity among a young nation's diverse states, the country has since grown dramatically in both size and population distribution. As a result, the principle of equal representation in the Senate no longer reflects the realities of today's America, where a minority of citizens in small states can exert greater influence over national policy than the majority living in large states. This imbalance affects not only how issues get addressed, but also how resources get distributed to states. The Senate's structure has remained unchanged despite these shifts, leading to a growing disconnect between representation and population. It is worth re-examining how the legislative system can be adapted to ensure there is fairness in the Senate. Whether that means adjusting representation, modifying funding formulas, or exploring new ways to balance state and population interests, the goal should be to have the government represent all Americans fairly, regardless of where they live. In the next video, we will talk about the president's role in the legislative process by looking at presidential vetoes. Until then, please like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and turn on the post notifications so you will be notified when I post my next video. I appreciate your support. Remember, you are powerful, you are capable, and you are the changemaker our society needs. Thank you so much for watching this video. I will see you soon.